Success. It's a word we worship. We build monuments to it. We write books about it. We tell stories of the self-made man, the lone genius who through sheer force of will and talent rises from nothing to conquer the world. We look at the Bill Gates, the Beatles, the sports legends, and we see something special, something innate, something different from us. We believe that success is a simple function of individual merit. But this is a lie. It's a comfortable lie, a convenient one. It allows us to believe in a world that is fair and just. But it's a lie nonetheless. The truth is, the story of success is far more complex, more mysterious, and frankly, more interesting than we've ever been led to believe. The real story isn't about the brightest stars, but about the ecosystems that allow them to shine. This audio summary is your guide to understanding that hidden world. We're gonna peel back the layers of myth and reveal the invisible forces that shape who makes it and who doesn't. We will explore the work of Malcolm Gladwell, a staff writer for The New Yorker, and the best-selling author of The Tipping Point and Blink. Gladwell is a master storyteller, a cultural detective who uncovers the surprising patterns in our world. In his groundbreaking book, Outliers, The Story of Success, he argues that to understand the successful, we need to stop looking at who they are and start looking at where they are from. What does that mean, exactly? It means we're going to look at their culture, their family, their generation, and the idiosyncratic experiences of their upbringing. You are about to discover why your birth month might determine your chances of becoming a hockey star, how many hours it really takes to become an expert, and why the legacy of a rice paddy can make you a math genius. This isn't just a collection of interesting stories. This is a new framework for understanding achievement. This is the manual for how success really works. Are you ready to discover the truth? The Roseto Mystery, a town that defied death. Our journey begins not in a boardroom or a laboratory, but in a tiny, tight-knit town in the foothills of eastern Pennsylvania. A town called Roseto. In the late 1950s, a physician named Stuart Wolfe was giving a talk to a local medical society when another doctor approached him with a puzzle. This doctor had been practicing in the area for 17 years, and he'd noticed something extraordinary. "You know," he said, "I rarely find anyone from Roseto under the age of 65 with heart disease." Now, this was the 1950s. This was before cholesterol-lowering drugs, before the modern obsession with diet and exercise. Heart attacks were an epidemic in the United States, the leading cause of death in men under 65. To be a doctor and not see heart disease was like being a gardener and not seeing weeds. It was impossible. Wolfe was intrigued. What was so special about Roseto? He assembled a team of researchers and descended on the town. They analyzed death certificates, took medical histories, drew blood, and conducted EKGs on nearly the entire population. The results were astonishing. In Roseto, virtually no one under 55 had died of a heart attack or showed any signs of heart disease. The death rate from heart disease for men over 65 was half that of the United States as a whole. In fact, the death rate from all causes was 30 to 35% lower than expected. And here's the really interesting part. A sociologist named John Brune joined the study, and they looked beyond just health. What did they find? No suicide, no alcoholism, no drug addiction, and very little crime. No one was on welfare. They didn't even have peptic ulcers. Brune, still amazed by it 50 years later, said, "These people were dying of old age. That's it." Roseto, Pennsylvania, was an outlier, a place where the normal rules did not apply. So what was its secret? What was this magical elixir protecting the Rosettans from the pressures of the modern world? Wolf's team went through every possible explanation. Was it their diet? Not at all. The Rosettans weren't following some healthy, old-world Mediterranean diet. They were cooking with lard instead of olive oil. They ate salami and pepperoni and eggs on their pizza. Sweets, once reserved for holidays, were eaten year-round. A whopping 41% of their calories came from fat. They weren't health nuts. They smoked heavily, and many struggled with obesity. So, diet was out. What about genetics? The Rosettans were all immigrants from the same small town in Italy. Maybe they were just a hardy stock? Wolf tracked down relatives of the Rosettans living in other parts of the United States. Guess what? They didn't share the same remarkable health. So it wasn't genetics. Maybe it was the location, the crisp Pennsylvania air? Nope. The death rates from heart disease in the two closest towns, Bangor and Nazareth, were 3 times higher than in Roseto. Wolf was stumped. And then he realized the answer was staring him in the face. The secret of Roseto wasn't their diet or their genes or their environment. It was Roseto itself. The town was a world unto itself. People stopped to chat on the street. Families were incredibly close, with 3 generations often living under one roof. Grandparents were revered. The church was a unifying, calming force. There were 22 separate civic organizations in a town of just under 2,000 people. There was a powerful, egalitarian ethos that discouraged the wealthy from flaunting their success and helped the unsuccessful hide their failures. They had recreated the social structure of their southern Italian village in the hills of Pennsylvania, and in doing so, they had created a powerful, protective shield against the stresses of the modern world. They were healthy because of their community. This discovery was revolutionary. At the time, no one thought about health in terms of community. Health was about individual choices, about your genes, your diet, your exercise habits. But Wolf and Brune showed that to understand why someone is healthy, you have to look beyond the individual. You have to understand the culture they are a part of, the people they surround themselves with, the values of the world they inhabit. That's the first critical lesson of Outliers. The story of success is not the story of individuals. It's the story of communities. And just like the mystery of good health in Roseto, the mystery of wild success has a similar, hidden explanation. The question is, are you ready to see it? The Matthew Effect. Why the rich get richer. Let me ask you a question. What does it take to become a star in Canadian junior hockey? You'd probably say talent, passion, hard work. After all, Canadian hockey is a pure meritocracy, right? Thousands of boys start playing before they're even in kindergarten. At every level, they are sifted and sorted, with only the most talented moving on. You can't buy your way in. It doesn't matter who your father is. If you have ability and you're willing to work, the system will reward you. Success is based on individual merit. Or is it? Take a look at the roster of a championship-level Canadian junior team, like the Medicine Hat Tigers. If you glance at the players' birth dates, you'll see a very strange pattern. An incredible number of them are born in January, February, and March. Now, this isn't a coincidence. A Canadian psychologist named Roger Barnsley was the first to notice this. And the more he looked, the more he realized he had stumbled upon an iron law of Canadian hockey. In any elite group of players, 40% will be born between January and March, 30% between April and June, 20% between July and September, and only 10% between October and December. What on earth is going on here? It has nothing to do with astrology. The explanation is brutally simple. The eligibility cutoff for age class hockey in Canada is January 1st. Now, follow this logic. At the age of 9 or 10, when coaches start selecting players for the elite rep squads, a boy born on January 2nd is playing against a boy who doesn't turn 10 until the end of the year. At that age, a 12-month gap is an enormous difference in physical maturity. The January kid is bigger, stronger, more coordinated. So who gets picked for the all-star team? The older kid, of course. And once he's on that rep squad, a cascade of advantages comes his way. He gets better coaching. His teammates are better. He plays 50 or 75 games a season instead of 20. He practices twice as much, or even 3 times as much. In the beginning, his advantage wasn't talent. It was just that he was a little bit older. But by the time he's 13 or 14, with all that extra practice and superior coaching, he really is better. He's the beneficiary of what sociologists call a cumulative advantage. A small initial advantage gets turned into a bigger advantage, which leads to another opportunity, which makes the small difference bigger still, until he becomes a true outlier. He didn't start out as an outlier. He started out just a little bit better. This phenomenon is called the Matthew effect, named after a verse in the New Testament. For unto everyone that hath shall be given, and he shall have abundance, but from him that hath not shall be taken away even that which he hath. It's the principle that the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. It's those who are already successful who are most likely to be given the special opportunities that lead to further success. And this isn't just about hockey. The same pattern holds true for European soccer, where the cutoff is often September 1st, and American baseball, where it's July 31st. But here's where it gets really serious. This same bias shows up in education. Think about it. The cutoff for kindergarten is often the end of the calendar year. The oldest kids in the class have a maturity advantage. Teachers might confuse that maturity with ability. So who gets put in the advanced reading group? The older kids. They get better instruction, they learn more, and the next year, they do even better. That small initial advantage persists and grows, year after year. 2 economists, Kelly Bedard and Elizabeth Dewey, found that among 4th graders, the oldest children scored between 4 and 12 percentile points better on standardized math and science tests than the youngest children. That's the difference between being labeled gifted and not. That initial arbitrary advantage can determine a child's entire academic trajectory. Can you see how profound this is? We have a system that we believe is a meritocracy, but in reality, we are systematically giving a huge head start to a small group of people based on an utterly arbitrary fact, their birthday. They didn't earn this advantage. They did nothing to deserve it. And yet, it plays a critical role in their success. We look at the successful and we see their talent and their hard work. But we don't see the hidden advantages, the lucky breaks, the cultural legacies that made their success possible. We profoundly personalize success, and in doing so, we miss the bigger picture. We overlook the power of opportunity. And opportunity, as we're about to see, is the key to unlocking true mastery. The 10,000-hour rule, the magic number of greatness. For generations, we've been fascinated by the idea of innate talent. We look at a prodigy like Mozart, writing music at age 6, and we assume he was simply born a genius. We think achievement is talent plus preparation. But what if we've got that equation wrong? What if talent is the lesser part of the story? In the early 1990s, the psychologist K. Anders Ericsson conducted a landmark study at Berlin's elite Academy of Music. He divided the school's violinists into 3 groups. First, the stars, the students with the potential to become world-class soloists. Second, the merely good students. And third, those who were likely to become music teachers. Then he asked every single one of them a simple question. Over the course of your entire career, since you first picked up the violin, how many hours have you practiced? Everyone started playing around age 5, and in the first few years, they all practiced about the same amount. But around age 8, a difference emerged. The students who would end up as the best in their class started practicing more than everyone else. By age 20, the elite performers had each totaled, on average, 10,000 hours of practice. The merely good students had totaled 8,000 hours, and the future music teachers had totaled just over 4,000 hours. Here's the crucial part. Erickson and his colleagues couldn't find any naturals, musicians who floated effortlessly to the top while practicing a fraction of the time. Nor could they find any grinds, people who worked harder than everyone else, but just didn't have what it takes. Their research suggested a stunning conclusion. Once a musician has enough ability to get into a top music school, the thing that distinguishes one performer from another is how hard he or she works. That's it. And the people at the very top don't just work harder. They work much, much harder. Researchers have seen this pattern again and again across countless fields. Composers, basketball players, fiction writers, chess players, master criminals. The magic number for true expertise keeps coming up: 10,000 hours. 10,000 hours. That's roughly 3 hours a day or 20 hours a week of practice for 10 years. It's an enormous amount of time. It's a number that is all but impossible to reach on your own. You need parents who encourage and support you. You can't be poor, because if you have to work a part-time job, you won't have time to practice. To get to 10,000 hours, you need a special program, an extraordinary opportunity that gives you the chance to put in the time. Now let's revisit some of our outliers. Think about the Beatles. When they came to America in 1964, they seemed like an overnight sensation. But they had been playing together since 1957, and in 1960, they got a very strange invitation to play in the strip clubs of Hamburg, Germany. It wasn't glamorous work. It didn't pay well, but it offered one thing: an insane amount of practice. As John Lennon later recalled, in Hamburg, we had to play for 8 hours, so we really had to find a new way of playing. 8 hours a night, 7 nights a week. Between 1960 and 1962, the Beatles performed live an estimated 1,200 times. Most bands today don't perform 1,200 times in their entire careers. Hamburg was their crucible. It was what forced them to get good. It was their 10,000 hours. Now consider Bill Gates. Brilliant math whiz, drops out of Harvard, starts Microsoft, becomes the richest man in the world. A classic story of individual genius. But let's look closer. In 1968, when Gates was in 8th grade, his elite private school, Lakeside, did something almost unheard of. It started a computer club. Even more remarkable, it installed a time-sharing terminal, a direct link to a mainframe computer. This wasn't the era of punch cards and long waits. This was real-time programming. The difference between playing chess by mail and speed chess. Bill Gates got access to this technology as a 13-year-old in 1968. From that moment on, Gates lived in the computer room, and then an incredible series of lucky breaks came his way. When the school's money for computer time ran out, the mother of another student, who worked at a local computer company, arranged for the Lakeside Club to test the company's software on weekends in exchange for free time. After school, Gates would take the bus to their offices and program late into the evening. Later, he found a computer at the University of Washington that was free to use between 3 and 6 in the morning. He'd sneak out of his house after bedtime and walk there. By the time he dropped out of Harvard to start Microsoft, he had been programming practically non-stop for 7 consecutive years. He was way past his 10,000 hours. Gates himself admits it. "I had a better exposure to software development at a young age than I think anyone did in that period of time," he says. And all because of an incredibly lucky series of events. Do you see the pattern? The Beatles, Bill Gates, the hockey stars, their stories aren't just about extraordinary talent. They are about extraordinary opportunities. They were given a chance to work really hard, and they seized it. They came of age at just the right time, in just the right place, to have their incredible effort rewarded. Success is not a random act. It arises from a predictable and powerful set of circumstances and advantages. The question we should be asking is not what are successful people like, but what were their opportunities? And once we start asking that question, we realize that the stories we tell ourselves about success are all wrong, and we're just getting started. What happens when we look at the people we call geniuses? The story gets even stranger.
Hey there, do you like this audio summary? Then take 2 seconds of your time and click on subscribe to the channel and activate notifications. With this simple action, you will receive many more free high-quality summaries every single week. You can also send us your appreciation with a simple like on this video. Thank you, and let's go on.
The Trouble with Geniuses, Part 1, The Myth of IQ. Meet Christopher Langan. Many call him the smartest man in America. The average person has an IQ of 100. Einstein's was estimated at 150. Chris Langan's has been measured at 195, a score so high it's literally off the charts. He was speaking at 6 months old. He taught himself to read at age 3. At 16, he was working his way through Bertrand Russell's notoriously difficult masterpiece, Principia Mathematica. He got a perfect score on the SAT, even though he fell asleep during the test. When we hear about someone like Chris Langan, we feel a sense of awe. Surely, a mind like that is destined for greatness. A person with that much intellectual horsepower can't be held back, right? To answer that question, we need to go back in time to just after the First World War, to a young Stanford psychology professor named Lewis Terman. Terman was the creator of the modern IQ test, the Stanford Binet, and he believed that IQ was the single most important thing about an individual. He believed that those with the highest IQs were destined to be the world's leaders, the people who would advance science, art, and government. In 1921, Terman embarked on one of the most famous psychological studies in history. He scoured California elementary schools, testing 250,000 children to identify the best and the brightest. He ended up with a group of 1,470 children with IQs averaging over 140, a group he called his termites. He was convinced they were destined for heroic stature. For the rest of his life, he tracked them, measured them, and chronicled their extraordinary achievements. Terman's ideas still dominate our world. Elite schools and companies use standardized tests to measure cognitive ability, believing that those at the very top of the scale have the greatest potential. We believe that more intelligence is always better. If I offered to raise your IQ by 30 points, you'd take it in a heartbeat, wouldn't you? But here's the problem with that assumption. Terman made a fundamental error. He didn't understand what IQ really means. Think of it like this. What's the relationship between height and being a professional basketball player? Well, it's critical. You need to be tall. Someone who is 5'6" has almost no chance. You probably need to be at least 6 feet, maybe 6'1". And all things being equal, it's better to be 6'3" than 6'2". But past a certain point, height stops mattering as much. A player who is 6'8" isn't automatically better than someone who is 6'6". In fact, Michael Jordan, the greatest player of all time, was 6'6". A basketball player only has to be tall enough. Intelligence is the same. It has a threshold. Once someone has an IQ of somewhere around 120, having additional IQ points doesn't seem to translate into any measurable real-world advantage. Someone with an IQ of 170 is no more likely to win a Nobel Prize than someone with an IQ of 130. They are both smart enough. Chris Langan's IQ is 30% higher than Einstein's. But that doesn't mean he's 30% smarter. It just means that when it comes to thinking about really hard things, they are both past the threshold. This is a radical idea. Think about where Nobel Prize winners get their undergraduate degrees. We assume it must be from the most elite schools: Harvard, Yale, Princeton, and some do. But look at the list. Many come from places like Holy Cross, DePaul University, the University of Illinois, and Hope College. The students at Harvard may have higher SAT scores, on average, than the students at the University of Illinois, but the students at both schools are all clearly smart enough. So if intelligence only matters up to a point, what else matters? Past that threshold, other things must start to become more important. Imagine I gave you a different kind of test. I ask you to write down as many different uses as you can think of for a brick. This is a divergence test. It doesn't ask you to find the one right answer. It asks you to use your imagination and come up with as many unique answers as possible. It measures not analytical intelligence, but creativity. One high IQ student, when given this test, wrote "building things, throwing," and that was it. Another student, with a slightly lower IQ but still well above the threshold, wrote "to use in smash and grab raids," to hold the eider down on a bed by tying a brick at each corner, as a target for shooting practice for short-sighted people, to make smoke signals with. Whose mind seems better suited for the kind of brilliant, imaginative work that changes the world? It's not just about how high your IQ is, it's about how your mind works. This was Terman's great mistake. He was so in awe of his termites' IQ scores that he failed to see that beyond a certain point, IQ didn't matter. When his geniuses reached adulthood, the results were disappointing. Some were successful lawyers and doctors, but the majority had careers that could only be considered ordinary. And a surprising number were outright failures. There wasn't a single Nobel Prize winner in the entire group. In fact, Terman's team had actually tested 2 boys who went on to win the Nobel Prize, William Shockley and Luis Alvarez, and rejected them both. Their IQs weren't high enough. Intellect and achievement, Terman finally concluded, are far from perfectly correlated. So the extraordinary intelligence of Chris Langan is not enough to guarantee his success. He's passed the threshold, certainly, but that's just the ticket to the game. To understand if he can win, we have to know much, much more about him. And that's where the story takes a tragic turn. The Trouble with Geniuses, Part 2, The Power of Practical Intelligence. Christopher Langan's mind is a national treasure, but his life story is a tragedy. Why? Because a high IQ on its own is not enough. To succeed in the world, you need something else, something Robert Sternberg calls practical intelligence. This isn't the intelligence that gets you good grades. It's social savvy. It's knowing what to say to whom, knowing when to say it, and knowing how to say it for maximum effect. It's knowing how to read situations and get what you want. Analytical intelligence is something you're born with, but practical intelligence is something you have to learn. And where do we learn it? From our families. Sociologist Annette Leroux conducted a fascinating study where she followed 12 different families, rich and poor, black and white. What she found was that parenting styles divide almost perfectly along class lines. Wealthier parents practice what Leroux calls concerted cultivation. They actively foster their children's talents and skills. They shuttle them from soccer practice to piano lessons. They reason with their children. They negotiate. They teach them to question adults and challenge authority. If their child is struggling in school, they intervene. They teach their children a sense of entitlement, and Leroux means this in the best way. They teach them that they have a right to pursue their preferences, to customize their environment, to get their way. Poorer parents, by contrast, tend to follow a strategy of accomplishment of natural growth. They see their responsibility as caring for their children, but they let them grow and develop on their own. Play isn't a structured activity. It's making up games with siblings in the neighborhood. They are often intimidated by authority. They don't challenge teachers. They expect the school to handle their child's education. They teach their children a sense of distance and constraint. Leroux isn't making a moral judgment. The poorer children were often better behaved and more creative. But in practical terms, concerted cultivation has enormous advantages. It teaches the skills of practical intelligence. Now, let's look at Chris Langan's childhood. He was raised in abject poverty. His family moved constantly. His stepfather was an abusive alcoholic who would lock the food away and use a bullwhip to keep the boys in line. Chris grew up in a world of chaos and constraint. No one taught him how to navigate the world. He learned to distrust authority and be independent. He was offered a full scholarship to Reed College, a prestigious liberal arts school, but it was a disaster. He was a crew-cut kid from a Montana ranch surrounded by long-haired city kids. He felt completely out of place. Then, a bureaucratic nightmare. His mother was supposed to fill out a financial aid form for his scholarship renewal. She forgot. When Chris went to the financial aid office, they told him essentially, "Tough luck, the money's all gone." They didn't help him. They didn't care. He dropped out. Later, he enrolled at Montana State. He had car trouble and couldn't make his early morning classes. He went to his advisor and asked to be moved to afternoon sections. A routine request. The advisor told him everyone has to make sacrifices. Request denied. He went to the dean. Same treatment. That was it. He dropped out for good. Now, contrast that with the story of another genius, Robert Oppenheimer, the father of the atomic bomb. Oppenheimer grew up in a wealthy Manhattan family, the very definition of concerted cultivation. In graduate school at Cambridge, he tried to poison his tutor. Think about that. Langan's mother missed a deadline. Oppenheimer tried to commit murder. What happened? Oppenheimer's influential parents negotiated with the university. He was put on probation and sent to a psychiatrist. Later, when the US government was looking for someone to lead the Manhattan Project, Oppenheimer, a 38-year-old theorist with no administrative experience and questionable political ties, talked his way into one of the most important jobs of the 20th century. He charmed the general in charge. He knew what to say and how to say it. He had practical intelligence. Chris Langan, with all his brainpower, couldn't convince a college administrator to move his class. He didn't have the social savvy. He didn't know the rules of the game. He didn't have the sense of entitlement that would have allowed him to say, "Look, you don't understand. I'm special. You have to help me." His genius was trapped. He spent his adult years working as a bouncer on Long Island, writing a grand theory of the universe that he despairs of ever getting published. He was born with a 1 in a million mind, but he was given the legacy of a troubled and impoverished childhood. And that legacy proved to be a crippling handicap. He is the heartbreaking proof that genius is not enough. Without opportunity, without the lessons of practical intelligence that we learn from our upbringing, even the smartest mind in the world can be left to flounder. This brings us to our next story, the story of a man who seemed to have every disadvantage, but whose background provided him with the perfect, hidden combination of opportunities. The story of Joe Flom. Success is shaped by hidden advantages, by the 10,000 hours of practice, and by the practical intelligence learned from our families. We've unraveled the myth of innate genius. Now, we turn to the world of New York law to see how these principles come together in the real world. We are going to look at the story of one of the most powerful lawyers in history, and in his story, we will find a blueprint for how outliers are made. The 3 lessons of Joe Flom. Joe Flom was by any measure an unlikely success story. He grew up in the Depression, the son of poor Jewish immigrants in Brooklyn. His father sewed shoulder pads for ladies' dresses. His family was so poor, they moved every year just to get a month of free rent. But Flom was brilliant. He got into an elite high school, then Harvard Law School without even having a college degree. He was at the top of his class, and yet, when it came time to get a job in the late 1940s, the big, prestigious white shoe law firms of downtown Manhattan wouldn't touch him. Why? It's our first lesson. Lesson number 1, the importance of being Jewish. In the 1940s and 50s, the top law firms were a private club. They were looking for lawyers who were Nordic, with the right social background, from the right schools. Joe Flom was short, ungainly, and Jewish. He wasn't the right type. Like so many other brilliant Jewish lawyers of his generation, he was shut out. So, he had to take a job with a tiny, brand-new firm, Skadden Arps, that took whatever work came in the door. This seems like a terrible disadvantage. But here's where the story gets interesting. The work that the white shoe firms did was representing the country's biggest companies in polite, gentlemanly matters. What they didn't do was 2 things: litigation, that is, suing people, and hostile corporate takeovers. That kind of work was considered unseemly, not for serious people. So, what kind of work came in the door for Joe Flom and his colleagues? You guessed it, litigation and hostile takeovers. For 20 years, while the patrician lawyers downtown were handling bond issues, Joe Flom was in the trenches, fighting bare-knuckle proxy battles for corporate raiders. He was perfecting his craft. He was putting in his 10,000 hours. Then, in the 1970s, the world changed. The financial markets were deregulated. Hostile takeovers, once scandalous, became commonplace. Suddenly, the work that the elite firms had disdained was the most lucrative and important area of corporate law. And who was the expert? The Jewish lawyer from Brooklyn who had been doing this work for 20 years. His apparent disadvantage had become his greatest opportunity. But that's only part of the story. Lesson number 2, demographic luck. Consider 2 lawyers. Maurice Janklow, born in 1902, the son of Jewish immigrants. He went to law school. He was smart. He was ambitious. But his timing was terrible. He started his career just as the Great Depression hit. The kind of work he did, wills, divorces, small contracts dried up. His career never took off. He became what his son called a scrivener-type lawyer, killing himself for $25 a closing. His generation lived through one cataclysm after another. The 1918 flu epidemic, World War I, the Depression, World War II. They never had a chance. Now, consider his son, Mort Janklow, born in the 1930s. Mort's generation was part of a demographic trough. Because of the Depression, birth rates plummeted. His generation was tiny. And what happens when you're part of a small generation? The world opens up for you. The hospitals are spacious. The schools are new, and the class sizes are small. The teachers are brilliant people who couldn't get other jobs. When you hit the job market, there's little competition and high demand. Joe Flom was born in 1923. Ted Friedman, another legendary lawyer, was born in the 1930s. They were born at the perfect time. The public schools they attended in New York City were the best in the country. The colleges they went to were affordable. The opportunities were boundless. Their success was not just about them. It was about their generation. Being born in the early 1930s was a magic time for a New York lawyer, just as being born in 1955 was for a software programmer. But there's one more piece to the puzzle, the most important lesson of all. Lesson number 3, the garment industry and meaningful work. Think back to the Jewish immigrants who came to New York at the turn of the 20th century. People like Joe Flom's parents. Where did they come from? Not from farms. For centuries in Europe, Jews had been forbidden to own land. They were city people. They were tailors, dressmakers, hat makers. They arrived in New York at the exact moment that the garment industry was exploding. It was the largest and most vibrant industry in the city. It was like showing up in Silicon Valley in the mid-'80s with 10,000 hours of programming experience. It was a stroke of unbelievable good fortune. But here's the key. The garment business wasn't just a job. It was meaningful work. What makes work meaningful? 3 things: autonomy, complexity, and a connection between effort and reward. An immigrant tailor, starting with nothing, could buy a sewing machine and start his own small business. He had autonomy. The work was complex. He had to learn manufacturing, market research, and how to negotiate. And there was a direct link between how hard he worked and how well he did. If you worked hard, you could make a life for your family. This wasn't like being a peasant in Europe, slaving away for an aristocratic landlord with no hope of advancement. And what did these immigrant parents teach their children? They passed down the lessons of meaningful work. They taught them the value of hard work, initiative, and ingenuity. It wasn't the intellectual rigor of studying the Talmud that made their children into great lawyers. It was the practical intelligence learned from watching their fathers sell aprons on Hester Street. Jewish doctors and lawyers didn't become professionals in spite of their humble origins. They became professionals because of them. Their culture, their generation, and their family history gave them the perfect combination of opportunities. They were outsiders, which gave them a skill nobody else had. They were born at the perfect time, and their parents did meaningful work that taught them the lessons of success. It is an unstoppable combination, and it shows, once and for all, that outliers are not born. They are made. They are the products of history and community, of opportunity and legacy. rice paddies, and math prowess. Why are Asians so good at math? For years, the conventional wisdom has pointed to some kind of innate advantage. But what if the answer lies not in their genes, but in their history? What if the secret to their success can be found in a rice paddy? First, a simple fact. Asian languages have a more logical and transparent number naming system than Western languages. In English, we say 11, 12, 13, words that are irregular and confusing for a child to learn. In Chinese, Japanese, and Korean, they say 10-1, 10-2, 10-3. The system is perfectly regular. It makes math less of a mystery and more of a pattern to be figured out. It gives Asian children a small, built-in advantage from the very beginning. But the real story lies in the work of a rice farmer. Growing rice is some of the most difficult and complex agricultural work imaginable. A rice paddy isn't a field you just plow. It has to be meticulously built, with terraces carved into mountainsides, intricate irrigation systems, and a perfectly level clay floor. The work is endless. A Chinese peasant in the 19th century worked on average 3,000 hours a year. A French peasant from the same era, 1,200 hours. In the winter, the French peasant would essentially hibernate. The Chinese peasant was busy making baskets, repairing dikes, and preparing for the next crop. But here is the crucial difference. The work of a rice farmer is meaningful, it's complex, it's autonomous, and there is a crystal clear relationship between effort and reward. The harder you work on your paddy, the more careful you are with weeding, with water levels, with transplanting, the more rice you will harvest. This culture of hard, meaningful work is reflected in their proverbs. A Russian peasant proverb says, "If God does not bring it, the earth will not give it." It's a statement of fatalism. A Chinese peasant proverb says, "No one who can rise before dawn 360 days a year fails to make his family rich." It's a statement of belief in the power of effort. This is the cultural legacy of the rice paddy. And what is mathematics? It is work that is, above all else, predicated on persistence and precision. It's not about being a genius. It's about being willing to sit with a problem, to work it and rework it until you solve it. Alan Schoenfeld, a math professor at Berkeley, once videotaped a student named Renee as she struggled with an algebra problem for 22 minutes. The average high school student gives up on a problem after 2 minutes. But Renee persisted. She wouldn't accept a superficial answer. She had a will to make sense of the problem. That, Schoenfeld argues, is the real secret to being good at math. And that persistence, that willingness to work, is exactly what is valued in a rice paddy culture. When students around the world take the TIMSS International Math Test, they also fill out a long, tedious questionnaire. It turns out that you can rank countries on their math scores, and you can rank them on how many questions their students bothered to answer on the questionnaire. The two lists are nearly identical. The countries that are willing to work harder on the questionnaire are the same countries that score the highest on the math test. And which countries are at the top of that list? Singapore, South Korea, China, Hong Kong, and Japan. All cultures shaped by the legacy of the rice paddy. Their advantage in math is not innate. It is cultural. It is the legacy of a world that taught them that the harder you work, the more you will reap. It's a lesson that has served them well. Merita's Bargain, a chance for a better life. Our final story takes us to the South Bronx, one of the poorest neighborhoods in New York City. Here, in a squat, gray building, is an experimental public school called the KIPP Academy. The students are chosen by lottery. Roughly half are African American, the rest Hispanic. 90% are so poor they qualify for free or reduced lunch. By all accounts, this is a school that should be failing, except it's not. KIPP has become one of the most desirable public schools in New York City, and what it's most famous for is math. In the South Bronx, only about 16% of middle schoolers perform at or above their grade level in math. At KIPP, by the end of 8th grade, that number is 84%. These randomly chosen, lower-income kids are doing as well in math as the privileged children of America's wealthiest suburbs. How do they do it? The answer lies in one of the most peculiar and damaging legacies of Western culture: the long summer vacation. Where did this tradition come from? From the 19th century belief that the mind, like a field, needed to be left fallow, lest it be exhausted. It's a belief born from the rhythms of Western agriculture, not the relentless toil of the rice paddy. But what happens during that long summer break? A sociologist named Carl Alexander tracked the test scores of Baltimore school children over 5 years. What he found was staggering. During the school year, the poorer kids learned just as much, if not more, than the wealthier kids. The achievement gap wasn't happening in the classroom. It was happening over the summer. During the summer, the wealthy kids' reading scores shot up by over 52 points. The poor kids' scores, they went up by less than 1 point. Why? Because of concerted cultivation. The wealthy kids are going to museums, to summer camps, to the library. They are being stimulated and engaged. The poor kids aren't. They are losing ground. America doesn't have a school problem. It has a summer vacation problem. This is the secret of KIPP. They have simply rejected the American school schedule. School at KIPP starts at 7:25 in the morning and ends at 5 p.m. They have school on Saturdays. They have 3 extra weeks of school in July. All told, they are spending 50 to 60% more time learning than the average public school student. This isn't a story about fancy facilities or smaller classes. It's a story about time. The extra time allows teachers to move at a slower pace, to go back over material, to make math meaningful. It gives the students the chance to put in the hours, to do the work that is necessary to succeed. Meet Merita, a 12-year-old KIPP student. She wakes up at 5:45 a.m. She gets home from school around 5:30 p.m. and immediately starts her homework, which can take 2 to 3 hours, sometimes longer. She gives up her evenings, her weekends, her friends from her old neighborhood. Is this a lot to ask of a child? It is. But Merita has made a bargain. In return for her hard work, KIPP promises her a chance to get out of poverty, a chance to go to a good high school, to go to college, to be the first in her family to do so. Someone brought a little bit of the rice paddy to the South Bronx and explained to her the miracle of meaningful work. Merita doesn't need a higher IQ. She just needs a chance. And that is the final powerful lesson of Outliers. Success is not the result of some innate genius or the simple sum of our own decisions. It is a gift. Outliers are those who have been given opportunities and who have had the strength and presence of mind to seize them. The world could be so much richer than the one we have settled for. If we understand that success is grounded in a web of advantages and inheritances, some earned, some not, some personal, some cultural, then we can create a world that provides opportunities for all, not just for the lucky few. We can make successes out of the unsuccessful. The story of success is not as simple as we once thought, but it is far more hopeful. Music swells and fades. What we have learned throughout this audiobook summary of Malcolm Gladwell's Outliers, we have journeyed through stories that challenge our most fundamental beliefs about success. We began with the mystery of Rossetto, which taught us that health, and by extension success, is deeply rooted in our communities and the world we create for ourselves. We then saw how arbitrary advantages, like a January birthday, can create a self-fulfilling prophecy of success through the Matthew effect. We discovered the 10,000-hour rule, the magic number for true mastery, and saw how it was the product not just of hard work, but of extraordinary and often lucky opportunities that fell to people like Bill Gates and the Beatles. We confronted the limits of genius, learning that beyond a certain threshold, a high IQ is no guarantee of real-world success. What matters more is practical intelligence, the social savvy that is cultivated in us by our families and our upbringing, as we saw in the tragic story of Chris Langan and the triumphant one of Robert Oppenheimer. Finally, we explored the profound power of cultural legacy. We learned how being an outsider gave Jewish lawyers like Joe Flom a critical advantage, how the hard, meaningful work of the garment industry prepared their children for the professions, and how the ancient rhythms of the rice paddy endowed Asian cultures with a mindset perfectly suited for mathematics. We saw all these principles converge at the KIPP Academy, where a 12-year-old girl named Marita makes a bargain to trade her time for a chance at a better life. The ultimate lesson of Outliers is that we are all products of our environment, our history, and the opportunities we are given. Success is not a solitary journey. It is a gift built on a foundation of advantage and inheritance. Don't stop here. This summary has only scratched the surface of the rich, thought-provoking ideas in Outliers. If you've been inspired, challenged, or had your perspective shifted, I strongly encourage you to continue your journey by reading the entire book. Discover the full stories, the detailed research, and the powerful conclusion for yourself. Your understanding of the world and your place in it will never be the same.